Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on our first of 3 tax credit pilot program training sessions. I wanted to introduce our speakers today. I'm Dan Sullivan, Deputy Director of Multifamily Development here at FHA in HUD headquarters. Joining me today on our panel is Lynn Worley, to my right. Lynn coordinates the tax credit pilot and really leads our effort day to day in the operational and is kind of our go-to person. To Lynn's right is Margaret Salazar. Margaret really was the lead in developing the program initially, and as well as the roles she fills in as a senior advisor to the Deputy Assistant Secretary is leading our RAD efforts. To Margaret's right is John Bell from our technical support division. John is really the leader of working on our information technology and the data transfer through what we call as the wheelbarrow, and we'll be wrapping up our session at the end of the next 2 hours. So we want to welcome all of those in the HUD offices. Our training really is directed to the HUD staff, both in the pilots and generally through our pipeline platform, but as well we wanted to welcome those lender partners that are participating, and I hope many of you have been able to join in with HUD staff and watch this session remotely. The first slide we want to talk about is really the point of the pilot and what the plan is. Then we'll talk about program eligibility and a little bit about who the people are. Challenges in the capital markets have limited the availability of financing for both market rate and affordable housing multifamily transactions. Consistent with our long-term mission of providing liquidity in a counter-cyclical market, FHA has really dramatically increased our production over the last several years, both for market rate projects as well as affordable housing transactions. The tax credit pilot is an important effort as we have ramped up production and anticipate continued high volume to make FHA's programs work more effectively with tax credit transactions and to clear some of the obstacles that have historically made our programs inflexible or difficult to work with, particularly from a timing perspective. Consistent with the department's vision and the congressional intent expressed in HERA, we are refining the MAP program and moving to an underwriter-driven processing system in order to make FHA work better in tax credit deals. As in the MAP program, the new model really envisions the lender taking the lead in performing the due diligence and underwriting, and we're relying on the lenders to reflect a robust credit analysis, not just getting the deal done in a broker model, but rather really underwriting the deal thoroughly and ensuring that the transaction applications comply with the program requirements and that we can close them quickly. Assuming the lender has done a good job, the HUD should be able to review the application package and issue the firm commitment in a time frame that works for the borrower and their needs, as well as consistent with the tax credit program timelines. The pilot program enhances the basic MAP program by giving authority and responsibility to a designated underwriter in pilot HUD offices who will review the entire application and then rely on technical analysts to support their efforts as they need or not, rather than the traditional technical processing linear approach from one discipline to another. The designated underwriter can rely on those same technical experts as needed, but for low-risk transactions or where the lender has clearly done their homework in a good way and the transaction clearly meets the program requirements, designated underwriters may not need to get all of the technical specialists to review a particular deal. In any event, we rely on the designated underwriter to get that application, screen it, and make sure it gets processed on time in a way that meets the borrower's needs as well as minimizes risk to the department. Our plan is to try this risk management approach rather than a processing and compliance perspective, and to roll out the model to a broader platform and use it on ultimately all of our transactions. But we wanted to try it on the mission-driven, lower-risk pilot deals first. So that drives some of the program eligibility. The pilot program purposely set eligibility thresholds in a way that minimizes risk to the department and at the same time facilitates the most expeditious processing. The intent of the pilot is not to do every tax credit deal possible, but rather to do those that meet the program, and after evaluating the results, we'll try to expand that model more broadly to all tax credit deals and then indeed for the entire program. Key features of the tax credit pilot are, one, it's limited to 223F applications. So if the project needs substantial rehab or is a new construction transaction, that would not be eligible for the pilot. Repairs have expanded in what they can be done before requiring a substantial rehab up to $40,000 per unit, regardless of the location of the project. However, only the amount limited in the program can be funded by mortgage proceeds. So depending on the location of the project and the high cost factor, the amount of 223F program mortgage proceeds is still limited to between $9,600 and $17,500 per unit of rehab. Additional repairs above that amount can be funded through tax credit equity, syndication proceeds, or other public funds or other equity sources, but not trigger a substantial rehab and ineligible for the pilot, so long as the total cost of the repairs remains less than $40,000, and again, so long as the mortgageable proceeds only fund within the 223F limits. The other constraint would be if two major systems need to be substantially rehabilitated. That is, the replacement cost of any major system needs work that's greater than 50% of that cost, then that would be a substantial rehab, and the project would not be eligible for the pilot. We would, of course, welcome such deals as a 221D4 application and try to process expeditiously, but technically they would not be part of the pilot. The third requirement is that projects have to be either 90% or greater project-based Section 8, or a project constructed within the last 3 years and needing a source of permanent financing to take out the construction loan or bridge financing. And then thirdly, it might be a tax credit pilot at the end of its compliance period that is resyndicating and bringing in new tax credits, whether or not it has Section 8 or not. So those are the three types of transactions. I should mention one other requirement. If the project does not have project-based Section 8 and is a tax credit deal with the rents, the achievable tax credit rents must be at least 10% below market. We recognize that limits some areas of the country for deals without project-based Section 8, but the idea is, again, to minimize risk by doing the low-risk transactions where there's a clear affordability advantage. We expect the program participants to include experienced tax credit developers with clean credit histories. We've restricted the lender base to a limited number of lenders, and HUD staff in specific offices that we've identified with both capacity and qualified staff led by designated underwriters. We'll talk more about the specifics in the, and go to the next slide, please. We'll talk more about the specifics in the remaining sessions. Thank you. So by way of policy clarification, we will talk more about specifics in the remaining sessions, and this coming Friday, November 16th, from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be having our second session, really diving more deeply into some of the technical analysis. Then the third session will be Monday, next Monday, and again from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we'll be talking about some of the specific affordability features as well as coordination with asset management and OGC through the closing process. But by way of introduction, I did want to mention a couple of policy clarifications and changes that we've made since initially rolling out the project based on feedback from HUD offices, HUD staff, and the industry. First point I wanted to discuss was just mention that we've given some technical definite direction in the development of cap rate derivation for those pilot projects which have a project-based Section 8 contract. For those projects, we will allow recognition of favorable financing and the impact of the subsidy in developing the cap rate for the value approach on the 223F program. That authority does not extend to other deals outside of the pilot. We have also clarified that projects that do not have Section 8 need to have, as I mentioned earlier, their rents below market, but we've clarified that it's not the ceiling rents available under the tax credit program, but rather what they're actually achieving. We've provided some examples in our processing guidance and FAQs, and it's a little bit technical, but basically the impact of this is to make more deals eligible by lowering the threshold of how much affordability is needed. Third change, we've expanded the maximum tenant relocation period from 14 to 30 days. Finally, we've expanded the scope of the pilot both by geography and plan on expanding it by eligible lenders. When we initially rolled out the tax credit pilot, it was only available in 4 multifamily hubs. We've now expanded the number of pilot processing hubs to 9 total multifamily hubs out of our 17 total, and we've allowed the geography to include the entire country. So no matter where a project is, it can come into the pilot, and then it will either be processed by the multifamily hub in which it has jurisdiction if that hub is a pilot. If not, it will be assigned to one of the processing pilot hubs, and Lynn Worley will speak to that process in a minute. Well, we'll be hearing more about these changes and other technical aspects of the program over the next 3 sessions. But first I wanted to mention, just recognize, as I mentioned, that we'll have designated underwriters in each of the processing hubs and their backups. We'll have 1 backup. And those folks are the key point of contact and who will be responsible for being the liaison with lenders and making sure that the deals get processed on time. They've been handpicked and restricted to people who the department has confidence in, that they have the experience and have been given the space to have the capacity to process these deals. Lynn Worley, as I mentioned, manages our operation day-to-day, scheduling loan committee and answering policy questions and bringing together the various people in the department when we have to decide to make decisions about policy changes and so on. So we're going to ask Lynn to take the next segment and turn it over to you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Dan. Well, this segment of our training will describe the process from pre-application through closing that we will be using for expedited processing of the pilot projects. We've broken the process into, pardon me.
So those are my slides.
We need...
Perhaps our assistants can bring up the Lynn Worley slides for us in a minute. But
Thank you. Absolutely. I will go ahead. So anyway, the process is broken into 3 basic parts. Those include the pre-application and application stage. Secondly, the underwriting phase. And finally, approvals and closing phase. So in a minute, we'll be looking at charts that explain those in a little more detail. I think I'll wait 1 minute for the chart because it will be helpful to describe it. Thank you. One more. Great. So just a quick orientation to the layout of the chart. First of all, it has a color key. And although everyone has to be involved at most phases of the process, the blue areas represent primarily activities by the lender, and the tan sections represent activities focused at HUD, and green represents areas that require activity on both parts. The left column provides a series of suggested time frames. And these are basically the times that we think will typically take to complete the stage in question. However, we recognize that projects will vary in terms of their demands for time at various points in the process, so it will always be different. And the only thing that's really, really important is that we can complete the process in the 120-day time frame. The column on the far right provides a number of tools and documents. These are both for the use of the HUD staff and for the use of the lenders at various stages in the process. And then, of course, the central column lists the process steps, and those are what I will be focusing on from now on. So the first step in the process is when a lender has a project and first calls a staff person in multifamily development in the hub office of that project to request a concept meeting. And the concept meeting is a critical part of the process because it is the point at which we can make a preliminary determination that the project is eligible for the credit or for the pilot project. And for this purpose, we have an eligibility checklist which includes most of the key questions that need to be asked to reach that determination. So that's the process in the call. The critical outcome is that determination, and if the project passes, the lender will be invited to submit a pilot project application, and if not, as Dan mentioned, the lender will be referred to another FHA program that might work better. The next stage is the HAP renewal increase request, rent increase request, and prepayment request, and any waivers that need to be required. These are all asset management activities, and the reason they're brought in here is that they have to be done well before the application is actually submitted, because they do take quite a while, and we don't want those to be a reason for delays in the project processing. This period also represents the time during which lenders are busy putting their applications together and doing some of the studies and so forth that are required. The next step is the actual submission by the lender, and that's followed by a preliminary the preliminary review of the designated underwriters in the pilot hubs that will be overseeing the process from there on. They want to, again, confirm the eligibility, and they confirm the completeness of the application, and hopefully identify the preliminary, in a preliminary way at least, the primary risk factors in the project. And that process should be done with about 5 days. We've really compressed the early steps so that we're not taking too much time up front and can get deep into the processing fairly quickly. At this point, too, when the application is determined to be complete, that starts the 120-day clock for processing. Finally, in conjunction with this slide, I do want to just note some changes that have been made to our processing recently. And these changes don't even show up on this process chart because they're at a lower level or a higher level of detail. They're basically concentrated in the pre-application phase, and they affect only those projects that Dan mentioned that are not located within the jurisdictions of our 9 pilot hub offices. And we'll go into a little more detail on those later. Basically, they just require a little bit more coordination between the hubs that those projects originate in and the pilot hubs that will be doing the processing of the projects. So this is the second primary step, and it is the underwriting process. It's expected to last about 45 days, and the work is really focuses with the designated underwriter and is, if not actually done by the designated underwriter, then managed by that person. The steps include things like data entry, initial reviews of projects, distribution of documents, some of it just sort of organizational things in the beginning period. However, 2 weeks into the underwriting period, we have a kickoff call scheduled. In fact, there are 2 calls, and I'll be discussing them because they both appear in this phase. And that call, the first call, is really intended to bring together all of the HUD staff at the field office who need to be involved in the project. And the designated underwriter will have determined who those people are based on specific aspects of the project in the preliminary review. The purpose of that meeting is to highlight any issues that seem to be cropping up and to make plans to coordinate the staff effort for the completion of the subsequent steps. The next part of the review process in the underwriting includes all of the technical reviews, site visits, and also the OGC review of organizational and other documents. And then 2 weeks after the first kickoff call, give or take, or whenever it's appropriate, there is a second call called the status call. And this is critical, and it begins to look towards closing. It includes not just the HUD staff who are involved, but also the lender, the owner, their attorneys, if they choose to bring them, and so forth. And the purpose is to enable HUD counsel to raise any issues that they have identified in the course of reviewing all of the organization documents, and secondarily to create a plan and a timeline to get to the closing process. And the last step is of course the closing checklist, or the plans for the closing, I'm sorry. So this oops. This is not the right slide. Oh, I'm sorry, this is fine. Okay. So the last step, or the last phase of the process, is the approvals and closing part of the process. We expect that approvals should take only about 10 days, and if all the other steps remained within the suggested timeframes, that would leave about 45 to 60 days to get to closing after the approvals. In the approval process, the first step is for the designated underwriter to prepare a recommendation for the director of the hub and submit that to the director. And if the director approves the project, then the director would pass that recommendation on to the Tax Credit Pilot Loan Committee. The loan committee is comprised of the designated underwriter and the hub director that the project is located in, as well as a senior multifamily development staff person. So that committee is the one that would actually make the final decision on the approvals of the project. And if the project is approved in that process, then it goes on and the firm commitment is prepared and released at that juncture. And that brings us to closing, which of course is the last step. And as I think I mentioned before, depending on how it's gone, there should be 45 to 60 days to complete that process. And I think on that note, I would like to open it up to questions. Do we have any emailed questions? No questions.
Okay. Well, if there are no questions, Lynn, any other comments, or should we ask go on to the more detailed discussion of the processing guide overview?
Yes, thank you. So this is our processing guide is our primary document of informal guidance, and it was prepared back last April when the program was first started. It has just now been updated, and that update was posted, I believe, Friday, and so it is available at this point. I do need to caution everyone that we were pressed for time in preparing this in time to get it out just for this first training session, so it is still in draft form, and, and we'll be putting some finishing touches on it later. The guide is intended for use both by HUB staff and by the lenders, so it specifically addresses the tasks that, that both groups have to do. And it, like the last discussion, it tracks through the entire process of completing a project and and is available for that purpose, gives direction as in preparing applications and that sort of thing in more detail. I mentioned that we had just posted the a new version, and I believe Dan mentioned that there had been some programmatic changes that you're probably familiar with at this point. The changes to the processing guide parallel those changes, I think. The first one is the program policy interpretations and adjustments that we had already made and described in FAQs are now incorporated into the processing guide document. So you no longer have to go to 3 or 4 places to find everything that we've just last said, and you'll find them there in the guide now. Secondly, there's a new section on field counsel and closing notes that's been added just to provide more detail on the closing process and on the needs of OGC. One of the things that we've emphasized throughout the design of the pilot project is how very, very important it is to bring OGC into the process as early as possible, and to make sure that the council that's selected for a given project has all the documents that are needed for them to begin work earlier rather than later. The final change in the document is called Process Notes for projects located outside of pilot hub areas or hub jurisdictions. We've mentioned this. This evolved from the fact that we now have projects located in hubs that are not necessarily the hubs that have been selected for processing of pilot projects. And so it was that expansion to all of the states that triggered the need for this new information. I can describe that process very briefly here. Just so people will know the basic outlines of it. I think it is important to the lenders so they know what hub to take something to, and that the hub staff that are not in pilot hubs also know what they can do to get a project moving. So the key elements of that process are, first, that the lender brings the project to the hub in which the project is located. And we're calling that hub the originating hub, just to distinguish it from the other hubs that are the pilot hubs. In that originating hub, the production chief will contact the person who is the designated underwriter in the nearest pilot hub, who in turn sets up the concept call. We felt it was important to have one of the people experienced in project underwriting available in that concept call, since the eligibility determination is such an important step earlier in the process. Another important step is that we discussed a lot was determining who and how counsel would be selected for this, and OGC's preference was that the regional counsel, they have identified people in each of the regional OGC offices who will select an attorney to close those projects on, that are not located in pilot hubs. Then what happens is the pilot hub designated underwriter does all of the fundamental underwriting and so forth, just as we've just discussed it, and also has to coordinate elements of the project that need to be, that require the attention of the originating hub as well. The originating hub will retain all of the asset management work, and together they will decide how to get site visits done, and I'm sure there'll be other various other crossing points like that. The hub director of the originating hub is the one who will sign the firm and issue the firm commitment, so that stays there, as does the closing. It will take place in the originating hub as well. So that's just a quick overview of those changes, and there's more detail in the draft version of the processing guide. And on that note, we are going to, do we have questions here? Sorry.
Let's just take a minute
Okay.
and ask if there are any questions. And if there aren't, I have questions for people in the audience to type in their answers. So let's give people a chance, though, just for a minute here to ask any questions.
And do we want to maybe refresh for folks what the email address is to ask those questions?
That'd be very helpful if we could remember what it is. And Mr. Wiesendanger is going to put that on the overhead for people right now. And I believe we said send it to Mark Wiesendanger at HUD.gov.
That's correct.
And put in the subject line tax credit pilot training questions. And Wiesendanger is spelled Wiesendanger. Who performs the site inspection? And we'll give Mark a chance to put his email address there for those of you who are in the field or watching remotely. And first question, which is a good one, who performs the site inspection and the environmental review? Lynn, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. If it's a project that's in a pilot hub, it's fairly simple. We hope that the designated underwriter will be able to do those site inspections. That's not always possible. It depends somewhat on travel money. And because the the environmental review or the environmental inspection also has to be done, sometimes the person who does that, who I believe is the architect.
Typically the appraiser.
The appraiser, I'm sorry.
Or other environmental officer will do the environmental review. Under the pilot program, some of the designated underwriters are qualified and capable of doing those themselves. Others will need technical assistance, and we'll arrange for that just like any other technical advice on a case-by-case basis and call that inspection out. I will note that one of the features of the pilot is we want easy deals. We want the low-hanging fruit, as it were, to have minimal risk. And if a project has significant environmental issues, it may not be appropriate for the pilot program. Having said that, HUD staff is required by statute and reg to conduct the site visit, and if the designated underwriter needs assistance, they'll call on the valuation or other environmental qualified staff to do that site inspection.
And I think in the processing guide, we also provide some additional detail about circumstances under which the designated underwriter would be able to perform that environmental review and that the appraiser would not be required to do it. So there's a little bit of detail about those kinds of circumstances. And then Lynn, you were talking about, if it's in the originating hub, that the designated underwriter would go out and perform the site visit. But what if it's not in the originating hub? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yes. So if it's a project that that comes from the originating hub but is being processed in another pilot hub, then in some cases that will worsen the issue of travel money, because the pilot hub staff person would have to travel further to get to the project. So those are cases in which more likely the designated underwriter in the pilot hub would make arrangements with someone in the originating hub to do that visit on their behalf.
They may or may not need to rely on other staff. It may be they can group site visits and wrap several of them in, or again, as Lynn suggests, to obtain assistance locally. I think the basic bottom line answer to this is it's the designated underwriter's job to figure it out and get it done. And however they elect, we don't want to overly prescribe, because every geography is different, every deal location is different, and the designated underwriter is responsible for figuring out how to get that site visit done. I will say that we do think that, just as on any other transaction, a site visit is important. This is a dirt business, and they should be, at some point, be on site and see the property physically. Other questions before we give questions? Okay, so before we go on to the next segment, where we're going to actually take a deeper dive into the narrative, if we were to give a quiz, here would be a quiz question for the first part. Describe tax credit program pilot eligibility. And so we'll give you a minute to write the 3 or 5 characteristics of projects that would be eligible for the pilot. And I'll look forward to getting
Mark.
Send those to mark.wiesendanger@hud.gov, and we'll look forward to the first set of answers for that question, and give you about 2 minutes. That sound good? Okay. And I'll let you respond to it with the answer. 5 to 7 steps. Seconds, and Mark Wiesendanger, if any answers have come in, if you could post them. And I see we have no more questions. The question that we have is, do we have any answers to the questions that we asked? Okay, so we're getting the first answers in, and we'll just give it another 30 seconds for Mark to copy and paste any answers that have come in, and then we'll review that first question. Okay, so the first question that we have is, what are the basic points of program eligibility to participate in the tax credit pilot? And at least one person out there got the right answer, that the pilot program is limited to the 223F program. It has to have repairs less than $40,000. And then it has to have at least one of the following features: either a project-based Section 8 contract, bringing in new tax credits, a project with a 3-year rule waiver where they're using the proposed 223F loan to take out a construction loan or a bridge loan, or a syndicated re-syndication of a project at the end of its compliance period. So those are all correct answers. So that's good that we're getting the major points. One other point of eligibility, if it's a project that does not have project-based Section 8, would remind people that the achievable actual rent roll rents in the project have to be at least 10% below market rents. So that's the correct answer. We're going to go to the second review question to make sure that we're emphasizing the points that we wanted to communicate today, and that's really about the processing. So the second question, which will give you 2 minutes to type in an answer and then a minute for Mark to post, please summarize the process for a deal, a transaction, after the time a lender has signed up a borrower in a potential deal, to go through the process of registering it with the HUD office and assigning it to a designated underwriter, whether in the originating office or if the project is located in an area outside of one of the pilots. And what are the 5 or 7 steps to get the project processed from the concept meeting stage to the closing? And if you would as well specify, how long do you think it should take for that process to occur? So we'll give you 2 minutes to answer that one and ask people to send in their answers to Mark Wiesendonger.
So we have a response to the processing question that says designated multifamily hubs, designated underwriter, required concept meeting, review of designated underwriting of lender's underwriting narrative, architecture, engineering, and cost, mortgage credit, appraisal, valuation, environmental review by appraiser, and issue firm commitment.
That's a good
Wow.
summary of all of the technical reviews, analysis done by the lender, and the designated underwriter is reviewing all of those aspects of the transaction.
Yep.
For each of the technical areas, architecture, mortgage credit, cost, appraisal, environmental, as needed, the designated underwriter would call on specialists to assist with that. Once the project has completed the review, they would issue the firm commitment. Lynn, how long would that process take?
Okay, this is easy. 120 days
From what to what?
from the submission of a complete application by the lender until the closing date.
Right, so that firm commitment is expected to take 45 days to process, and then another 45 days to get to the closing is kind of our standard processing time. We realize that sometimes there's back and forth or things get delayed, so we set up the sort of outer boundaries as 120 days. That application submission, the preliminary meeting, the underwriting, loan approval, and the closing process within 120 days. So that's the correct answer and really what we wanted to communicate. Just as on any other MAP application, we are concerned with the deadlines, particularly in the pilot, and again, we expect that the designated underwriter will be responsible for driving that project through to get it closed. And sometimes we discuss these complicated issues and questions, and at the end of the meeting I always ask, what is a successful pilot program application? And the answer is one that closes. The corollary is it has to stay closed. To get to that, we want to really take a look at the lender's narrative and attachments. So we're going to shift to Margaret Salazar now, and she'll be our
Great.
next speaker.
Great, thanks everybody. So to kind of recap today so far, we've talked about kind of broad brushstrokes about the pilot, the eligibility, the goals of the program, and then Lynn walked us through the process and really the engineering that we've done on trying to create what we think is a streamlined process that really relies on the designated underwriter as a way to move deals a little bit more quickly than our standard process. But in addition to all those process changes and the eligibility requirements, we've also done some work to try to create a streamlined application itself. If we've created all this streamlined process, but we still have all the same exhibits and all the same kind of very lengthy, large application packages, we're probably going to have a little bit of a hard time streamlining the review process. So what I'm going to be talking about is just broad brushstrokes on what we've done to create an application exhibit package that has some tools to help folks do some streamlined underwriting review. So I'll talk a little bit about what exhibits we've kind of streamlined out of the typical 223F application package. And I'll also talk a little bit about the role of the standardized narrative and the wheelbarrow. You'll be hearing from John Bell later today about the wheelbarrow and the details about how the wheelbarrow works. But really what I wanted to emphasize today is that for the pilot, we have what we call a standardized lender's narrative document, as well as a wheelbarrow document. They're really the heart of the application. And the goal here is to create some standardized submissions that ask lenders the same basic questions, that give lenders the opportunity to present information in a way that's consistent, that's streamlined, that really allows us to get at the right questions to assess the risk of the deal in a more streamlined way, as opposed to the myriad of different formats that we receive these submissions in the standard program. So I'll be walking you through a little bit more detail there. So what does the lender's narrative look like? So here's some sort of highlights here. In the beginning, the early pages of the narrative document, we have an eligibility and threshold checklist. That's a tool for the designated underwriter and the lender to both use to just make sure that the application in fact meets the eligibility requirements for the pilot, those three types of projects that we've heard about earlier today. We also include in the lender's narrative some of the lender's analysis that has been typically required as distinct application exhibits. So, the lender's cost analysis, the lender's analysis of valuation, things like that have in some cases been submitted as distinct application exhibits are just included in the lender's narrative document. It includes questions about risks and mitigants and specific information about risks that are particularly important for tax credit transactions that are a little different than maybe your typical market rate transaction. It also includes summary information that would typically be provided on the beautiful Form 9/2013, which we found was duplicative of a lot of information that was included in other parts of the application. So we've done away with the 2013 form for the pilot, and the information that we would be asking on the 2013 is included in that narrative form. And we also, of course, asked some information about the tax credit awards and the development team. So because we've created the standardized lender's narrative, which is a really holistic document, we're able to actually omit certain forms that have typically been required for FHA loan applications. So as I mentioned to you before, the 2013 does not need to be submitted. The 2013 SUP does not need to be submitted, that form. There are some questions on that form that are really important, but you're able to include the answers to those questions on a master certification. And just to kind of pause for a moment, we do allow under the pilot receipt of a master certification form that includes some basic certifications all in one place that have typically been required to be submitted as distinct documents. The details on that master certification form are described in the processing guide that Lynn had mentioned. The 2264A form is actually included in the wheelbarrow that John will be explaining to you later, so we don't need to have a separate 2264A form. And if you know FHA underwriting, you know the importance of that form. The same information will be reviewed, but it's included in the wheelbarrow, so we don't need it to be separately included. And then the Byrd Amendment and the certification of the mortgagor's architect are also certifications that can be submitted along with the 2013 SUP information as part of a master certification form. So we really are trying to reduce some of these extraneous paperwork. I'll talk a little bit about architecture, engineering, and cost exhibits. Now, there will be a training session specific to architecture, engineering, and cost, and we'll go through how we'll be addressing some of the repairs. So I won't go into too much detail, except to mention that, as I think some of the respondents emailed in their responses to the earlier questions, that we are allowing repairs up to $40,000 per unit in this program, which is a little different than the typical 223F requirements. So the processing guide and our training later will go through a lot of detail about what that looks like and how we'll be managing that. But what we've tried to do for the application exhibits is to take that potentially higher repair limit into consideration while also trying to create a streamlined application review. So, for example, the lender's architecture, engineering, and cost review, which typically is a separate exhibit, is able to be included as part of the lender's narrative document. The certification from the mortgagor's architect, as I mentioned earlier, is not required because it can be part of the master certification. The legal survey can be delayed until the initial endorsement closing. The description of the condition of the property, the list of repairs and improvements made in the last 2 years, and their estimated cost, that has actually been listed in the MAP guide as a distinct application exhibit, but it really should be included in the lender's narrative. So if a summary of that is in the lender's narrative, we don't need a distinct application exhibit with that information. And then because this is a 223F program with existing housing, we don't need a soils report and foundation analysis for these deals, so we're waiving that here. I want to talk a little bit about mortgage credit because, of course, in the tax credit world, what we're looking for might be a little bit different in these applications than would be in a standard FHA MAP deal. So just one very kind of clear difference here in what we're requiring with the application exhibits. Obviously, we don't need to have a certification that there are no tax credits in the deal because by definition, these all do have tax credits. We've done a little work to try to streamline out some extraneous information for the mortgage credit review so that we're really relying on the lender's expertise, the lender's due diligence, and allowing our designated underwriters to do risk-based underwriting based on the capacity of all the players involved. So just to give you an example of that, the personal financial and credit statements, Form HUD 92417, what we've said in the processing guide is that that's not required for the tax credit limited partner and syndicator if the lender can provide a certification that these entities are among those with ample experience and ratings to show sufficient borrower reliability. And what that's really saying is we don't necessarily need to see the financial statements and credit reports for all of the players in the deal. We want to rely on the lender's expertise that they've done the due diligence. That can include information from rating agency scores and also just the lender's due diligence. So, if current rating agency scores are available, we want to see those, but we don't necessarily need to see the credit reports of all the players. That includes the investor, the syndicator, and nonprofit board members. And I know that a lot of nonprofits can be very concerned about the need to provide credit reports for every single member of the nonprofit board. So we're basically providing some streamlined approaches here that we don't need to see reams and reams of financial and credit reports if there's other due diligence work going on and we have a comfort level that the lender has done that appropriate review. The same is true for 2530s. Now there's no getting around 2530s. It's very important for us for our previous participation review. But in certain cases, for example, nonprofit board members who are not board officers, we are providing a little bit of flexibility there that we don't need to do 2530s for all nonprofit board members. I want to talk a little bit about valuation. So I'll talk first of all just broadly about valuation exhibits, and then I'll talk specifically about these assisted housing applications. So one of the things that we've done is we've created some ways to streamline out some valuation exhibits that we don't believe add to the risk-based underwriting for the pilot deals. That includes a market study. We're not requiring a market study for these transactions. We're not requiring some of the specific detailed exhibits that were in the map guide. For example, photographs of the building, area map showing location, and the as-built survey. Now, we hope that the appraisal, of course, will include some of this information, the photographs, the area map, but we don't need to see these specific distinct exhibits with this information, which is the way that they're listed in the map guide. Now, for assisted housing applications, we're going to have a session, I believe it's early next week, next Tuesday, next Monday, on assisted housing applications. So we'll be going into a lot of detail about what you do with the Section 8 rent setting, the Section 8 HAP contract requests. But I did want to highlight a few things here today because if designated underwriters, if you're going to be working on Section 8 deals, we want to make sure you're aware of this. So as we mentioned earlier, assisted housing applications are those applications that have 90% or more of the units at the project covered by a project-based Section 8 contract. So as part of the pilot application, as part of the valuation exhibits, we're requiring the application to include a copy of the Section 8 HAP contract renewal request. We expect that most, if not all, of these applications will involve the borrower actually requesting a Section 8 HAP contract renewal, which typically is done for a 20-year term. And that may or may not include a rent adjustment, so an increase, a request for an increase in rents. So we want to see a copy of the HAP contract renewal request. We also want to see a copy of the Section 8 rent comp study, and this is the study that the borrower commissions to determine whether or not they may be eligible for a rent increase. Of course, as this rent comp study is completed, it actually includes a 2273 form, which is essentially identical to the 2273 that's required by the MAP guide. So if the rent comp study includes that information, we're not requiring a distinct 2273 form that would just parrot back the same information. Because this is a Section 8 HAP contract, we actually, in HUD, have something called IREMS, which is our data system that tracks things like contract rents, occupancy, and kind of, the vacancies at the property. We also have the track system, which includes that information. So we're not requiring for these assisted projects a detailed occupancy history and rent rolls that we would require, for example, for a market rate or a tax credit transaction that does not have Section 8. Now, we also know that some of these properties that come in under the assisted housing side of this pilot will be either a Section 202 direct loan project that's looking to refinance, or it could be an FHA insured project that's looking to prepay and refinance. If that's the case, we may waive the survey requirements, particularly for 202 projects where HUD is actually, has provided the loan, so we would have the information on the project, and a survey may not be a critical factor for that project. And then for the FHA insured projects like a 236, for example, we may waive the arm's length transaction information if there's not been significant changes in the ownership of the project. I wanted to mention one other thing about assisted housing applications, which is that the pilot is really envisioned for assisted housing projects that have a Section 8 project-based rental assistance HAP contract. But we have begun to receive some questions about projects that may be coming in under the rental assistance demonstration and anticipating to use project-based vouchers. And I just wanted to make clear that that 90% of units with the rental assistance, that could be project-based vouchers. And if that's the case, the application exhibits related to rental assistance will look a little different than what they will be for our Section 8 HAP contracts. And we just issued a mortgagee letter which provides a significant amount of detail on how to submit applications for the pilot for those project-based voucher projects. And that's mortgagee letter 2012, I believe, -20, which is available on our website. So I just kind of wanted to wrap up here. And again, I've given you kind of a high-level overview of some of the exhibits that we've streamlined out of the application and some of the tools like the lender's narrative and the wheelbarrow. But just to kind of wrap things up for you, the pilot processing guide has a full annotated exhibit list. So that's where you should look to kind of get a sense of what we've actually stricken out of the application exhibit list from the map guide. And it also goes into a lot of detail about why we're asking for the things that we're asking for as part of the application and why we've removed certain other exhibits. Really the focus here, just to kind of bring it home to the kind of goals of the program, is we're really trying to focus on risk-based underwriting. And so that's why we're looking for those exhibits that help us to answer the critical questions about the risk of the transaction, as opposed to just compliance that you've, yes, I've reviewed this huge ream of paper. I just finished talking a little bit about assisted housing transactions. One of the other goals here of how we've set up this application is to integrate the asset management and the Section 8 requirements into the FHA loan submission to reduce some of that confusion and that back and forth. Some of that will always be there. We're trying to do what we can to engineer that. But we're really hoping to create an integrated process where the lender and the borrower are both aware of what's going on with the Section 8 contract and how that relates to the underwriting. And then finally, we're really looking for a standard presentation of data. We think that the more that we, as designated underwriters and HUD folks, can receive the information from lenders in a standardized format through the wheelbarrow, which John will be describing for you in a moment, and through that lender's narrative, that will really help us to do a thorough yet expedited review of the important information related to the transaction. It will really help to replace the myriad and disparate mortgage credit and other exhibits, which can sometimes be superfluous and sometimes even contradictory. So that's really where we're trying to get to. And I think with that, I'd like to pass it over to John, who can talk to you a little bit about what is this mysterious wheelbarrow and how it works.
Good, okay. Thank you. First of all, I just want to say how excited we are, Dan and Lynn and Margaret and I and others who've worked on this project, that it's here. It's been a long time coming, and we look forward to processing this. We've got a good group of lenders and a good group of folks in the hubs who are working on it. I'm going to spend 15 minutes talking a little bit about what is the pilot and why we like it. And in a nutshell, we like it because it creates a standard format for looking at a lot of really relevant information. And today is not intending to be a training on how to fill out the wheelbarrow. It's really intended to be a description of what the wheelbarrow is. And in that regard, we're going to probably go more quickly than we would otherwise go. We will have a training on how to fill out a wheelbarrow. We've done one once before, and that training lasted about 45 minutes. And a video of that training will be available to you. So what is the wheelbarrow? Well, it's an Excel file that creates a standardized report. The report's 26 pages, and it's all pre-formatted such that the file will print automatically into a 26-page report. There are two main purposes of the wheelbarrow. First, to capture necessary information to allow the FHA to understand exactly what is in a project. Second purpose is to provide a concise, consistent report so FHA's designated underwriters can perform accurate and efficient reviews. These accurate and efficient reviews are in your interest as lenders and our interest as HUD, because we'd like to get through these as quickly as possible. We recognize the pressures to get tax credit deals done quickly. Unlike other deals, there are deadlines that tax credit developers face that have significant constraints on them. So I've said it's necessary, it's important to get necessary information. So a good question to ask is, what is necessary? And the answer really is all of the sources and uses for the whole project. A project may have 2 or 3 different sources of funding, and the FHA loan may comprise only half of the funding. A lot of tax credit deals get done with a 40 to 50% capital components. That's the mortgage, and the rest is tax credits. So we want to look at the entirety of the project, not only those uses that are funded by by FHA proceeds, but also those funded by tax credit proceeds. We look particularly at what is mortgageable and what is non-mortgageable. A lot of people think that mortgageable costs are well defined. They're actually defined by default based upon what we allow in the 2264. And non-mortgageable is sort of everything else. But we want to look at both. And the tax credit wheelbarrow actually gives you an opportunity to create standardized categories for both of these uses of funds. The second thing we look for is a draw schedule. As Margaret will tell you when she was doing the underwriting, oftentimes we'll see a project where it appears that there's money enough to fund it, but when is it coming in and from where is it coming are two questions that aren't always answered. So we've put a very abbreviated, standardized draw schedule that breaks the draws down into 6-month intervals and made that part of the standard form as well. So why is it called a wheelbarrow? Well, it began in 2010 and is simply a process of moving information from what was the application and solely an application in paper form into digital form to make it easier for you to look at, for you to present information to us and for us to look at the information. It also enables us to access information into digital form, into a database, which will help us and you in the long run. What's the difference between the old wheelbarrow, which has now been well established and is accepted by most industry participants, and the tax credit wheelbarrow? Well, the tax credit wheelbarrow takes a few of the special aspects of tax credits and includes them. So for example, the tax credit wheelbarrow goes into detail about when the tax credits are coming in. It talks a little bit about basis and also addresses some other questions that are unique to tax credit projects. We've tried to keep this information to a minimum. And what does it do for us and for you? Well, it allows you to do a report in minutes instead of hours. It frees us at FHA up to process applications more quickly. Since every project looks like every other in terms of its report, we know where to go for information, and that helps us and helps you. And finally, the wheelbarrow's insistence by the requirements it asks for on seeing all of a project's sources and uses improves our ability to understand the whole transaction. You can almost think of a tax credit project like an estate, and normally we might look at the important parts, the kitchen, the bathrooms, the bedrooms, and the roof, and the other systems. But there's a lot more that we need to look at. And by looking at the entirety of the project, apart from just what's financed by the FHA proceeds, it helps us a great deal to understand and get comfort with the project. I'm going to go quickly through a couple of the major exhibits that are among the 26 pages that the wheelbarrow spits out. But suffice it to say that we've divided these into separate and useful exhibit reports. You're not supposed to look at all of the details of this index, but this is what the final exhibit will look like. This, for example, is the executive summary. It's packed with information. Again, don't look at it in detail. Suffice it to say that almost everything that we want to see about an overview of the project is here. This is perhaps one of the most telling of the exhibits. This shows the total sources and uses and the mortgageable and non-mortgageable sources and uses. When I look at a new project and an application that's put in, I want to make sure that the sources and uses balance not only for the total, but for what's mortgageable and non-mortgageable. Usually what you'll see under the mortgageable amount is what will appear almost in any other 2264. That is primarily what is financed by the mortgage proceeds. This is unique to the tax credit wheelbarrow. This is a list of the sources of the project. Again, you don't need the details. Suffice it to say it's in there. This is the draw schedule that was mentioned before. Again, the big picture is that it divides the draws into 6-month intervals. Just one small detail about how to complete a wheelbarrow. This is a typical Excel wheelbarrow entry page. In the blue background cells is where lenders will fill in information, and those that are not blue are derived from the information that is put in blue. On the tax credit pilot site in the HUD public website, you can find the instructions for filling this out. My best advice is follow the instructions. They're pretty clear. And the other key is to have all of your information in front of you when you fill out the wheelbarrow. And if you do that, you should be able to do it in the first time in a couple of hours, and after that, even in less time. This is just a big overview of what one of the pages looks like. It is a single worksheet, and you can see the blue background cells that would be filled in. This also gives you an indication of exactly how it would print out into 12 pages when you use the automatic print system. Here are 3 exhibits that are part of the executive summary. You can see in this instance that very few blue cells appear. All of these exhibits, all of these tables are generated automatically. But here again, it's good information, and it's very helpful for us to see it in this context. So what do you need to remember from this introduction? Well, first, if you go to the website where the tax credit pilot is housed on the HUD website, you'll see that there's a great deal of information that's useful. The latest versions of the tax credit pilot wheelbarrow and the instructions for it can be found there. In addition, there'll be other materials posted there, other training materials that'll be useful for today. And as I mentioned, there are directions for filling out the forms. What you see below in blue is a link to the tax credit pilot website, and we're happy to send that to you later if you forget it. So this is a picture of the tax credit pilot's website. You can see that there is a section on the list of participating lenders and the housing notice, the mortgagee letter, and Appendix A, B, C1, and C2. And in this case, you would click on C1 to get the latest version of the wheelbarrow itself, and click on C2 to get the instructions. So the whole idea here is that the wheelbarrow will help us and you process applications more quickly. And ultimately, the goal will be to get an approval for your project. So thank you. Again, my name is John Bell. I'm happy to take questions or calls. And that concludes my presentation.
I'm going to ask 2 questions.
So, John, could you describe for us a little bit about, the lender's role versus the designated underwriter's role with the wheelbarrow? Who actually completes it, who submits it, and what do we do with it?
Yeah. The responsibility for filling it out really is the lender's responsibility. And they've done a wheelbarrow completion in the past, and this simply expands what they've ordinarily done. They should print out the pages that are preset and submit the printout as well, but they need to submit the Excel file as well to the designated underwriter, who will look at it, make sure that it all balances, make sure all the information is properly submitted. And if it's not, their responsibility is to go back to the lender and say, we've got a couple of glitches that appear here. We've actually gotten 3 of these already, and the lenders did a very good job in filling them out. The sources and uses generally balance. I've had no real problems with folks calling up and saying we don't understand it, and I commend the lenders who have done it, and it's been very useful.
That's great. I know that just from doing prior transactions that we often have to go back to the lender later in the process and ask for time-based sources and uses in their draw schedule, and we get information in lots of different formats, and it can be kind of confusing. So it sounds like this is a more consistent way.
Well, we certainly hope it is, and it's proven to be very useful for the hubs. We've used it very successfully in the National Loan Committee, and we've probably processed roughly 150 wheelbarrow supply projects. So yes, it has been useful, and we encourage people to call with questions.
Okay, great.
And speaking of questions, this would be a good time, if you have questions, to send those in on an email to Mark Wiesendanger at HUD.gov, mark.wiesendanger at HUD.gov, and we'll take a 2-minute break and wait for any questions. Thank you. type and signal us that there are no questions if there aren't.
Well, we're not seeing, oops. There is a question. It says, this is going to be a question for John. On the Excel wheelbarrow, have you locked the cells so that formulas can't be accidentally erased? When reviewing, who you need to know that the calculations are working?
It's always a difficult decision whether or not to lock cells and prevent people from seeing the contents of cells. We actually have not locked any of the cells in the wheelbarrow. It allows you to navigate throughout all of the worksheets freely, and we found that this actually is better. It's almost a form of transparency. We've also tried to minimize the amount of inputting that's being done in separate blocks. If there are a problem, if a problem does exist with the wheelbarrow, I think it's important to simply get a new version and start again. But we don't think that if you look at a couple of the main cells, you'll have any doubt that the calculations are performing as they should. That is, if the sources and uses balance and they're consistent with what you see, you'll be able to see if the formulas are working. Keep in mind that the wheelbarrow doesn't perform complex analyses. It really is designed to take information that otherwise would be on paper and represent it.
Thank you, John. Any further questions? No other questions? All right, then I think we have basically finished for today. I would like to thank Dan and Margaret and John for their help in preparing and delivering the presentations today. I think we covered a lot of ground. I also wanted to give you just a brief update on where the program stands in terms of its production. We have over a dozen projects in our pipeline tracking system now. Those enter that system as soon as a concept meeting is requested or held. So there are several hubs involved already in sending and getting projects ready to send in to us. One project from the San Francisco hub was approved week before last. And we do have another committee meeting set for tomorrow, so we expect to have determinations on 2 projects under our belt by the end of the day tomorrow. With respect to lender activity, as you may know, we started with a request for applications to lenders back in April when the program just started. We approved 21 lenders at that point, and we have since requested additional applications, basically in conjunction with our expansion of the areas in which we're able to do projects now. You know, that meant opening new markets, and consequently we want to make sure we have lenders in each and all of those markets ready to bring us projects. So we have received applications. I believe we received 22 or 23 total, and we are just about to wrap up the scoring, and we will issue letters to those who are selected no later than November 25th. And the final note is just a reminder that our next session is going to be this coming Friday, the 16th. Same time, same place, same link. And we hope that you'll all be able to join us then. Thank you.